First, first presenter is Sarah Hines. Do you have Sarah here? Yes. Thanks for joining us today, Sarah. Sarah is working at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, working on field services, and then today she's going to talk about her network, USDA, USDA, and what she's been working on related to nature-based solutions. Take the floor, Sarah. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. First of all, just want to check if my audio is okay. Like most of you, I'm working from home, and the only place I can kind of get away from the chaos of inside is outside, but my neighbor decided to mow their lawn. So does it sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, just let me know if anything kicks up too much, and I can try to change locations. But thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to the NATURA network to present. I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you a little bit more about the USDA Forest Service, which is a federal government agency, and what we're doing in urban research in general, and then specifically about the Urban Field Station Network, which is the part that I help coordinate more specifically, and some of the work in the big picture questions that we're trying to answer there around urban sustainability, and just see how we could further connect the dots and work together. So I appreciate this opportunity. So let me see, should I share slides from my end, or I sent over a PDF. If it's easier for you to share it on your end, that's fine too, whatever works.
You can share, and then we'll use the ones that you sent me as a backup.
Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Challenge of having too many windows open at one time. Okay. Everyone see this? Okay, great. So yeah, like I said, thanks so much. I'm with the USDA Forest Service. We're a federal agency charged with helping to steward all of our nation's forests, not just the national forests. And we've been working extensively in urban areas for the last several decades. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about overall what we do, and then our Urban Field Station Network. So I just want to acknowledge this moment that we're in right now. Many of us are living through, I mean, we're all living through a time of great uncertainty, and also the inequities that have always been with us are just ever more striking and heightened. And of course, there's a lot of awareness of the reforms that are needed. And I think many of us within our network are focused on these issues. There's of course this broader awakening to these issues of racial injustice and social inequity. And this is part, I think, of what the Urban Field Station Network has been focused on for a while, because so many of these issues are interconnected. You start looking at tree cover and you realize, wow, these patterns are not coincidental. They have a long history, especially in the United States, of certain policies and practices. And so while we've been looking at this, we're also exploring our own roles and the ways that we can be just more inclusive and more, add to the data and the stories and what's needed to help to create the changes that we want to see. Urban forestry throughout this whole pandemic has really been on the front lines as kind of essential service, both in terms of the people who are involved in urban forestry and of course the trees themselves. And especially now, I know this is a global network. Many of you are familiar with the situation in the United States being what it is. And I mean, to the extent that forest patches can provide cooling, that's obviously ever more critical these days when many of our most vulnerable communities do not have access to cooling all the time, and cooling centers are dangerous places to convene right now. So our focus has always been on community needs and equitable tree cover and health implications, but I think even more so, and resilience, access to green space, even more so, we're spurred to continue this research and continue making the connections that we want to make. So I'll just give you a brief overview of the Forest Service, so you're aware of that general context, and then kind of go a little bit more into the Urban Field Station Network. But I want you to, I just want to convey that there are multiple points of connection. We are a big federal agency, like I said, maybe about 35,000 people. So I am just one of those people, but I aim to be a connector and convener as much as possible to and through this network. So I won't bore you too much with these organizational charts, but we do have a chief who kind of leads up our agency. She is not a political appointee. She's a career person. The Forest Service has always been led by career appointees. We have these kind of primary entities, right? International programs. So we actually do a lot of work extensively internationally, providing technical and financial expertise, oftentimes funded with help from USAID. And then the National Forest System is, of course, what many people think of when they think of the Forest Service, all of those public lands that we steward on behalf of all Americans and beyond. And so, but beyond that, we do have this state and private forestry entity where we provide state financial technical assistance to states, tribes, communities, municipalities. Some of you may have worked with the Forest Service through that capacity. And then we are the world's largest natural resources research and development organization. So we have an incredible amount of capacity and people spread throughout 7 different research stations, 5 of which are geographically based and 2 of which are thematically based. We have the International Institute of Tropical Forestry and the Forest Products Lab being those 2 thematically based. And threaded throughout all of this, we do a lot of work on urban sustainability research. And it wasn't all started at once, it wasn't all started kind of from one area. I think all of these different entities have at different times through whether it's congressional budget appropriations or whether it's, research stakeholder needs, shifting kind of patterns of demographic settlement and change. We've come to it through so many different directions, and it's threaded throughout so much of what the Forest Service does. Did want to make mention of one of our primary kind of overarching themes these days for anyone who does tend to work with the Forest Service. We have this national emphasis on shared stewardship, and this is a word and a concept that is being talked about a lot these days. But I think so much of what we do in the Urban Field Station Network, and I'll introduce that a little bit more in a few moments, has really always been about shared stewardship. And I would imagine that a lot of you who are embedded locally, as well as representing these national networks, probably aspire to some of these same things. And so, like I said, we aspire to them, and hopefully we tend to do them. But establish these shared priorities, collaborate across boundaries. I can't even begin to summarize the number of partnerships that we have, especially at the urban field stations, that go across state, federal, local, municipal boundaries, but also private, nonprofit, community, like all of the domains, and that making those really big tents and finding inroads for just about every partner group, I think is really one of the ways where how we've been particularly effective in urban areas. And then figuring out what are those outcomes at scale. It's not just about the outputs. The field stations are primarily kind of research based in nature, but we don't measure our effectiveness through the outputs like research papers. We really try to capture those outcomes. And I just, I've included there are some of the national priorities for the Forest Service in terms of our research. So it's pretty broad and wide ranging. I just want to talk about one of those priorities a little bit more, this technology and science delivery effort, and mention a few of the resources that we have. The Vibrant Cities Lab is a website where we've partnered with American Forest to try to bring together all of the latest research and case studies and syntheses around all of these different aspects of why and how to invest in urban forests, so that folks can make the case, secure, in their attempt to secure resources or support or whatever. And so we're constantly looking for feedback on that site for what else is needed. It's a work in progress, and I encourage you to check it out when you have an opportunity, and what are the ways that we can leverage this network to get more resources and information on there. And then we have this ongoing webinar series that's been 5+ years running. And I apologize, I made these slides a little while ago. And so tomorrow's webinar actually features Vivek and also Kate Mingoya from Groundwork USA. And I think that's going to be a great part 2 on urban heat island, which is of course an incredibly timely topic. But they're basically the second Wednesdays of every month, and we would love for to welcome any and all of you. No pre-registration is required. You can find more information on our website. And if you have topics or ideas, you know, we're constantly creating the calendar, you know, maybe 4 or 5 months out, but we would very much welcome just collaboration on thoughts. It doesn't have to be Forest Service researchers who are sharing, and we oftentimes like to pair researcher and practitioner. So anyway, if you're interested, check that out or just contact me. So more about the Urban Field Station Network. These are locations you can see on the map where we show up. We have a physical presence and we have a robust partnership network. We think both of those things are key ingredients to being particularly effective. We also try to bring to bear all of the deputy areas of the Forest Service, so that you saw represented earlier. So it might be primarily anchored in research and development and knowledge co-production, but we also, you know, have our state and private forestry and our national forest system folks embedded and working with us, and even international programs. And the network diagram on the right is of course extremely small, and I don't expect anyone to really be able to see or read it, but it just kind of represents that within this 35,000+ person organization, we have a small but really dedicated and profound group of researchers and practitioners who are Forest Service employees who are part of the field station network. But we don't conceive of ourselves just internally. Like, so much of the field stations consists of our partners at all different levels. A key, you know, hallmark of what we do is knowledge co-production, and many of you are of course familiar with this. You know, part of the tension lies in that managers and practitioners and researchers need different things at different timescales. And so even within the Forest Service, our researchers are still evaluated based upon their number of papers per year, right? There are other factors, but we haven't been fully successful transitioning away from that as a primary characteristic of success. And yet that doesn't always matter to the practitioner community. What they might need is, you know, information before it's published, briefing papers, slide decks, things like that. And so our researchers really do go above and beyond in terms of figuring out what it is that the practitioners need on the time scale that they need it. And both parties, I think, are, you know, flexible, creative, and adaptable, and coming up with how, you know, what are the things that are going to make a project successful. I think some of the key concepts to this knowledge co-production, as we conceive of it, are just understanding that this could take the form of different institutional arrangements, anything from a very small project partnership with a $10,000 budget to a giant national partnership with, you know, big conservation organization names involved and people and resources that are, you know, much broader. That trust and embeddedness is super important. It's not just about collaborating to put together an RFP and doing kind of the one project. It's about these long-term relationships and relationship building that then allows for the exploration of concepts and ideas, and just the conversations that emerge yield, you know, social data and yield new research possibilities. And like I alluded to earlier, the new approaches by both managers and researchers in understanding what each other's needs are and how we can best meet those within the context of, you know, trying to achieve a certain outcome. This is a brief rundown of what we do. I think, you know, the left-hand column, the tools and applications, some of you may be familiar with these tools. Some are, you know, kind of hallmark, especially iTree, I think is known pretty globally. Just urban tree canopy assessments, I think, are critical tools that the Forest Service developed the methodology along with the University of Vermont. But we are not the only organization who does urban tree canopy assessments these days. And so you may be very familiar with that. you know, I think one of the wonderful things that we try to do and do more of is this art and science collaboration. So we've done a lot around urban wood, resulting in a line of furniture products with a national retailer, Room and Board, as part of our effort to really develop an entire supply chain as well as national demand through, you know, of urban wood, and it's a pretty complex problem, but I think one of the key ways to get to hearts and minds can be through art and through, you know, beautiful products. And so urban wood is one example. We actually have an artist in residence program that is launching now for the 4th year, and we've expanded it throughout our entire network, and the call for artists is open globally. And I'd be happy to share that with this network if folks are interested, but there's a small stipend, and so the artists that are selected, they basically get their pick of a listing of projects and what they want to work on, and it's a way to kind of further unpack the research that we do and make it maybe more broadly accessible and available. And there's just so much possibility, and I myself am not an artist, but I really appreciate kind of the new perspectives that it brings. So I'm not particularly gifted in talking about you know, what these artists, what the projects and products have yielded, but they've been amazing. So that's another way how we try to advance and expand our network. And so here's just kind of a listing of who we tend to work with, and probably no surprises here, but what I do want to mention is that, you know, especially these days, we're aware of who's missing and how can we do better. And I think, you know, so many aspects of what we all maybe collectively do, but speaking from the Forest Service, what we do, you know, we have pretty established partnerships, pretty established networks. And while I think we've tried to innovate in the urban sphere, I know that there are so many different partners out there who are not currently collaborating with and who are not currently sharing resources with. And I think we are trying to be very mindful about making sure that we do better and do more into the future. So now I just want to focus on maybe some big picture questions that our research and practice is trying to answer together. And in so doing, you'll see that there are a lot of hyperlinks. So, you know, as this presentation will be made available, feel free to explore and click on these, because it just kind of highlights, not all, but maybe some of the key pieces of what we have out there and what we hope to do more of. So I mentioned the Vibrant Cities Lab earlier. We have a pretty robust synthesis on urban nature for human health and well-being. It's a couple years old at this point, so of course there's so much more that has come about. I think I just lost my presentation, but let me see if I can get it back up here. Okay, here we go. I mentioned briefly a little bit about the work we've done around urban wood. It's so much bigger than urban wood. We started with this question of how can we take a resource that we see being wasted and turn it into something that has value, and it very quickly broadened into this project that looks at the social, economic, and ecological well-being of entire communities and uses urban wood as a tool by which to attempt to transform, you know, all of that in some way, shape, or form. And so we have a really nice video, a number of videos and case studies and things like that. And we're actively, one of our hallmarks in the Urban Field Station Network, I should have mentioned, is to try as much as possible to replicate data across locations and over time, to replicate project successes. And, you know, we try to almost follow like a franchise model. So even though that map I showed you, there's Forest Service investments in each of those cities, there are places, you know, we have collaborations in China and Stockholm and elsewhere where people are kind of replicating and doing some of the same data analyses and collecting some of the same data sets and doing the same analyses that we're doing. And that's a way to, for all of us to obviously extend capacity and begin to learn, you know, much more thoroughly. And so getting back to urban wood, you know, one of the things that we kind of try to do is this pilot prototype production model. So we pilot something in a particular city, and once we figure out, you know, a model that works, we try to prototype it and produce it elsewhere. And so with urban wood, we started a really dedicated effort in Baltimore, knowing that this would have relevance for lots of post-industrial cities. And indeed now we're working collaboratively to expand out to St. Louis and Philadelphia and a bunch of other candidate locations, looking at both reclaimed wood, so all that wood that's locked up in those vacant abandoned buildings, and all of the urban fall that comes down increasingly because of insects and disease and climate change stressors and things like that. Another big picture question, why are our urban trees dying? So again, I mentioned data across locations and over time. You know, oftentimes at the municipal level, getting that data over time on particular trees and particular tree health, you know, that's something that where capacity building is needed. And, you know, it's oftentimes outside of the scope or the resources of a local municipality to figure out how to measure that over time. So we've been working collaboratively to set up kind of a standardized monitoring network for understanding long-term health implications. We have a couple of resources that I think are really wonderful and surprisingly have, you know, are filling a gap that is surprisingly still there. What can urban and rural forestry learn from each other? So, you know, if you think about urban forests, I think a lot of people tend to focus on the street trees, the residential trees, the manicured parks. We of course have these forest patches in cities that are more akin to their rural brethren, perhaps, than you know, a manicured park or a residential landscape. And so in order to make those places more resilient to climate change, we can't use the same techniques, right? We need techniques that are a little bit more cost effective, that kind of recognize silviculture in its broadest sense of, you know, how do we create resilient landscapes? How do we encourage succession? How do we deal with invasives and then encourage succession in a way that's sustainable, things like that. So there's actually a lot that we can learn across gradients. And so we're very open to that knowledge. And at the same time, a lot of our rural forestry counterparts, I mean, you know, these urban forest patches are the harbingers of what's to come. And so there's a lot that can be learned in both directions. So we have a lot of research and collaborative projects happening on this theme. I'm just cognizant of time.
You've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, no problem. I'll go ahead and begin to wrap up. But what's driving resilience in our urban ecosystems? Again, a critical question. It's related to forest patches. This diagram on the right kind of unpacks what I was talking about, where we kind of we haven't always thought about these forest patches in cities, but they can resemble their rural brethren much more completely. And so anyway, we are working with the Natural Areas Conservancy in New York and others to really understand how to best steward these forest patches in cities. And of course, there are broad and far-reaching effects on public health and resilience and equity that are embedded in this. Another big research question is, how do we manage for changing climate now? This gets at the tension between researchers and managers. You know, managers have to do stuff right now, even though we don't have all the results. And the thing is with climate change, you know, the story is never complete. And so we're working in Minneapolis along the Mississippi River recreation area to implement a project that has kind of a control and then 3 different resistance, resilience, transition, 3 different treatments, to figure out what does best over time. And then we're planning to replicate that in different ecosystems in the East Coast especially, and go from there. And then again, how do we find threats before they become problems? There are so many, like I would characterize them as very slow moving explosions. So they don't have the impact of, you know, that immediate, but what they really are doing over time is, you know, altering our landscape in profound ways. And we need better ways of detecting this using the instruments and the data collection already available to us. And so that's another facet of our research. And then finally, getting at that theme of inclusion and diversity. What could a truly inclusive partnership landscape look like? So we do so much of what we do is social ecological in nature, and understanding our partnership landscape and who's out there and who's doing what and who is at the table and who isn't, and who, all of those dynamics is an incredibly important part of the work we do in cities, as well as the work that we do on the national forest landscape. And then, of course, I mentioned at the beginning, what does our urban tree canopy cover look like and why? This is a very complicated question. Well, it's complex, and it has a lot of history in social issues and race and inequities and racial injustice. And so as we begin to peel back the layers of what it does look like and what it could look like and how to get it there are just so many related questions and partnerships. And then we have this urban FIA program that really helps us understand what's happening to the nation, and increasingly the world's forests, because our international programs has provided critical support, especially in places like the Amazon and Africa, to better understand the current state of forests and how they're changing over time. What benefits do trees provide? As I mentioned, iTree, and many of you may be familiar. And finally, I just want to get back to this idea of networking together. So I just gave you a huge data dump, and I'm sorry for all of it, but I just wanted to illuminate the points of connection, because you all know your own entities and networks better than I do. And so if any of that resonated with you, I'd be happy to, figure out how we can engage further on all of this. And like I said, I'm just one point of connection in the Forest Service. Philip Broadbell is our national lead for urban research. Lauren Marshall is our national lead for urban and community forestry. And some of you may know some of the researchers are in our network. And so we're all available and happy to connect anytime. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we have time for one or two questions here.
I just had a quick question. This is Nancy. I was wondering about the Artist in Residence program. You have that, is that across all the Forest Service stations or just the urban ones?
Right now it's across a number of different urban locations, and okay. We expanded it beyond New York City for the first time this year. And at first it was just also Baltimore and Hawaii. And as soon as we put out the call, we had more of our internal urban field stations being like, hey, this is super cool. Wait, we want to participate. So we're in the process of adding San Juan in Puerto Rico and maybe even Denver. So I will share the website for that on the chat so that you can get more information.
That's great. And I just would make an observation that with if some of the partner networks outside the U.S. are interested in funding learning exchanges, that could be a way that you could get your urban field stations onto the list of host networks that would be interested in hosting learning exchanges. That would be great, and that's going to be coming out. That's going to be coming out fairly soon, instructions about that.
Great, thanks, Nancy.
Sure.
Any other questions to Sarah? Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for the presentation. Our second presenter today is Marcus Collier. Presenting Connecting Nature to us. Sorry about the background noise. He's at the Trinity College Dublin. Take the floor, Marcus.
Okay, you can hear me okay? All
yeah.
Right. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to present. I'm delighted to talk to you about the Connecting Nature project, or network, if you like to call it that. So it's a I should put this into full screen, please. That'd be better. There we all are, happy at the beginning of our project. It is a Horizon 2020 European funded innovation action. So you will have heard about this from some of the other presenters in the over the last couple of months, and you'll be aware that Horizon 2020 funding agency and other agencies in Europe have invested quite a lot of money and in both research and innovation in the nature-based space and the ideas of nature-based solutions. And so we're one of them. We're three years in at this stage, and we've got another 2 years to go. So I think the picture at the end of this project is we're not going to be, well, hopefully we'll be smiling just as brightly at the end of the project. We never know. There's the bit about the project is the idea is to innovate with nature to co-create climate solutions or climate resilience in cities. It's a network of 30 partners in 16 European countries. And we also have hubs that we're developing. One that is fairly well established now at this stage in Brazil. We were in the process of China and Korea until the kicking off and so on. But unfortunately, we were all due to head to Wuhan, believe it or not. We decided that might not be a good idea. So the Chinese one is on delay, and so is Korea. But we did manage to kick off the Caucasus with Armenia and Georgia hub very recently. So that's quite an interesting area of endeavor there. It's coordinated by ourselves here in Trinity College Dublin. So it's myself in the School of Natural Sciences, but also working with the School of Business. And so this is where the network or the project kind of takes its particular viewpoint on nature-based solutions. It's the idea of how do we finance nature-based solutions? How do we innovate with them? How do we create new innovations? And so on. So the total budget there is close on 12 million. And we have around 200 people working in the project in these different countries, but they will have also got a lot of associations with other projects. How do I advance this one now? Okay, there we go. There's our map. It's a little bit unclear at this stage, but obviously we couldn't fit in the rest of the world in there. But this is really what I wanted just to show you a little bit more about our makeup. It's a rather simple structure. We have 10 or 12, depending on how you look at it, city authorities, about 10 small and medium enterprises, 8 or 9 academics, and in the middle of all of us will be the different communities of interest, communities of influence, communities of practice, and so on in different parts of the urban setting. And we have a mentorship arrangement, at least that's the way the project was set up. We have a front runner system, which is 3 cities, Genk in Belgium, Glasgow in the United Kingdom, and Poznan in Poland, who are essentially mentoring follower cities, fast follower cities. There they are, Pavlos Melos, which is part of Thessaloniki in Greece, A Coruña in Spain, Bologna, Italy, Burgas in Bulgaria, Ioannina also in Greece, Malaga also in Spain, Nicosia in Cyprus, and Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I'll come back to Sarajevo later on, because this is where one of the innovations I think is really going to be quite interesting in our particular area. And we have also multiplier cities, so it's cities that we're not able to fund, but have chosen to join us and to participate, Tbilisi in Georgia and Yerevan in Armenia. And we have interest from several other cities to become multiplier cities. It's not as if it's a club or anything, anyone can join. We're happy to network with as many cities as possible. It's just that the ones that I mentioned earlier on are funded. When I said though about having the front runner and the fast follower approach, in the last 3 years, we found that sometimes, in fact, some of our follower cities could also be leading in other directions. And so we're finding ourselves at a bit of a crossroads in the project and developing ideas of how we can harmonize this approach, and instead of separating it as some kind of fast follower, mentor, mentee relationship, in terms of how our cities can help to speak to other cities outside the project. We've different SMEs involved in this project. Some of you will be and some of you are belonging to some of these SMEs. Collier, for example, you'd be familiar with not only the main office in Collier, but they're the ones who are dealing with the Brazil, China, Korea, and Caucasus hubs. And then we have different academics involved. So it's a relationship, and in some cases, for example, some of the universities are also in the cities as well. So we have the University of A Coruña and the city of A Coruña That way we're pairing the science policy, science practitioner, and practitioner policy relationships together. And Timon and Nancy talked earlier on about the different relationships in this this space. So we're trying to, you guys used a circle, I'm using a triangle, but it's basically the same idea of trying to create technology, research and practice and so on to get together in the nature-based solution arena. So just to let you know in perspective what is around at this stage, what is being funded and what networks are out there. And in the PDF that will be sent around at the end of this, these are all hot linked to the websites of the various projects and the various networks. But you can see just here at the bottom that we're hovering in around the 200 to 240 million euro worth of funding. There's 4 or 5 new projects starting now in September in this area, nature-based solutions. And you can see ourselves, Grow Green, Unilab, and Urban Green Up were the first 4 in the innovation actions. We know that we've heard before from Claire and Harriet about Naturevation and other projects that are currently research innovation. And we have some nature-based solution projects that are specifically focused. For example, Fusiko's looking at mountain areas and so on and so forth. And then there's also projects that are not necessarily funded by the Horizon program. You might be familiar with the guys in Oxford or Circular City, Encore, people like that. But in order to kind of try and keep track of everything that's going on, the European Commission has developed these task forces, these clusters, these task forces, one on indicators, so discussing ways that the projects are trying to develop key performance indicators, or just, let's put it this way, do nature-based solutions work? How do they work? Are they effective? Are they competitive with non-nature-based solutions and so on? How do we evaluate them? How do we evaluate our success rates? How do we measure success? Because if we can measure success, we can take that to the bank, quite literally. We can say, funder, you could finance these parks, this urban park, or let's say you could finance an urban forest, as we were hearing earlier on, based not only on the financial return on investment, but also the social return on investment, or the cultural, or the other dividends that are out there. So we need to develop more holistic ways of evaluating things. There's a task force then on finance, which is really in the space to do with the innovating actions, and there's how we communicate. And there's mooted to be a few more task forces on the way. It's not necessarily dealing with China, but mostly dealing with global areas. And so the European Commission will be looking very much at NATURA to be on that task force in some form or other, some format or other, because we've told them they should be, and hopefully they will be able to facilitate participation. And this, essentially, it's not just a talking shop. A lot of these task forces are now starting to produce data. They're producing guidelines. They're producing booklets. They're producing evidence for nature-based solutions. And this is very much going back to the investment that the European Commission is putting into it. The European Investment Bank is putting aside about 500 million euro. The World Bank about the same amount, in terms of how they invest and stimulate the nature-based approach in cities. So that's the European arena in a quick flash. Sorry for speeding so fast through it, but that's essentially it. There's a coordinating action starting up called Network Nature, which will be actually has just started. Some of them don't have websites just yet, but they will be available fairly soon. So this is the area of for the European market, and you can see that there's around 100 or so cities involved, and where the projects would like to see more involvement. We'd like to see more and more cities participating in some form or other. And the way they can participate is actually to take some of the outputs of our projects and put them into practice or experiment with them or enact them in some form or other. That would be a really good way forward. Just in terms of connecting nature, we're very much led by the social sciences. I wear several hats in the scientific community, either ecological or sociological, depending on what way I get out of the bed in the morning. Connecting nature, though, tends to has started really focusing on more the processes for how we scale nature-based solutions out in cities. And how do we, and Sarah was mentioning earlier on about the social and cultural side of things, and we start to hear things about, you know, equity and gentrification and other things that can occur in cities, that are negative sides sometimes of nature in cities, that they can gentrify and enrich communities and separate societies instead of uniting them. So what we've been looking at in the project is how do we co-create in real time. So at the moment we're at, I got 10 when I was writing it, but I think we might have a few more on the way. Different types of processes, or you could call them innovations. So and I have them all hot linked here. I was going to jump to the website and go through them all one by one, but to be very honest, you know, with time not against us, I think I'll just stick with the slide. And you can look at when we circulate the PDF, you can click on these and you can look at the different side of things. You'll notice on almost everything you click on, there'll be a sign saying coming soon. A lot of our guidebooks and a lot of our physical outputs, our PDFs and so on, were significantly delayed by the coronavirus outbreak in terms of the editorial process. So we're a little bit behind than I would have liked. I had hoped to have this out at the start of the summer, but it'll be up and running by next couple of weeks' time. We have a framework for scaling out nature-based solutions, ways that cities can work and to bring nature-based solutions, work within the city and also work with communities. Like many of the other projects, we've provided technical solutions, but we focused a lot on other things such as governance, different processes for coordinating the scaling of nature-based solutions in cities and in peri-urban areas as well. Not surprisingly, there's a focus on financing. We have developed finance and business models. How do you pay for it? Who pays for it? How do you return that money? It's, you know, obviously it's taxpayers' money or it's investors' money. It has to be realized in some form or other. And we've also developed a business model canvas for planning with cities. And to be launched next month, we have developed a nature-based enterprise platform. And I was really keen to, I might get back to you, Sarah, on the Urban Wood, the Baltimore one. This is very much a nature-based enterprise. And what we've done in addition to charter and measuring nature-based enterprises, we're actually building and we're launching a platform for marketing nature-based solutions and enterprises. So it would be almost a way that different nature-based enterprises can actually sell and scale out their products. The definition for nature-based enterprises is still a little bit under development, shall we say, but essentially these are enterprises that draw on nature for their product, but also support nature in return. It's a little bit, we need to sharpen it up a little bit more, and we're in the process of developing thematic papers and discussion groups. Again, all of our discussion workshops got held up because we can't really meet face to face, where you kind of really get a lot of work done. And then as part of the processes, we've developed different types of co-production and co-creation guidelines. And in this, we have two new areas that we're experimenting with, similar to what Sarah mentioned earlier. We call them the unusual suspects. And I unashamedly use a screenshot from the movie, The Usual Suspects, to talk about it. But it's still in development process. And the other thing is the Sarajevo process. And I suppose this goes back to the reason why I personally got into working with nature and working with communities. In the 1990s, I got some funding from what was then called the American Fund for Ireland, or the Ireland American Fund, to bring communities from Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland to work together over a restoration or a conservation project. So the idea being, I developed this as a way that you can bring disparate communities together over a particular environmental issue, because you quickly realize that we all breathe the same air, we all drink the same water, so therefore it's in all our best interests, despite our differences. And that was during a time when there was still active conflict going on the island of Ireland before the peace process. So we decided that we would try something similar in Sarajevo, and some of you will be familiar with the anniversary recently. That Sarajevo is still, if you go there, it's still pretty war-torn looking, and there's still quite a lot of fractions there. And we developed a body mapping and city mapping exercise that we're trialing at the moment in Sarajevo as a co-creation process. And fingers crossed, it's actually turning out to be very, very interesting and revealing a lot of information, and also a lot of potential for cohesion, community cohesion, and cultural cohesion, which we're very excited about. So those two are in the pipeline at the moment, and I hope in about 8 to 10 months time to be able to come back to the network and give you a little bit more of updates on how things are going there, because I feel we have a nice system or process here which could actually tackle not just conflicts, post-conflict situations, but other types of situations that we're currently seeing in places like North America and Brazil and places like that. And then we also have a reflexive monitoring process where cities themselves on a daily basis can actually keep themselves updated on the progress of nature-based solutions. And finally, which I don't mean to make it finally, but our most successful one to date is this Urban by Nature program, which has been led by Collier and has been already successful in Brazil, and we're starting the Caucasus region. And so this is essentially a webinar series to stimulate the nature-based solution approach in different cities. And this will be one of the innovations, like nature-based enterprise platform and the reflexive monitoring, and a few of the other things, which will continue past the end of the project. And these are the areas where we want to see, we want to encourage the network, the NATURA network colleagues to join in, to give us feedback, to take things, play with them, use them, abuse them, tell us where we're going wrong, tell us where we're going right, and essentially to keep pushing and keep forcing these different co-creation processes and these innovations, so that we can tune them and fine-tune them to be much more global and much more utilitarian and useful for cities. And so in general, that's the Connecting Nature network. It's part of the, obviously it's part of the European network. We have plenty of opportunities for linking, and during the virtual all hands meeting and various other meetings, I could see significant levels of our areas where we could share ideas and share opportunities. We have a limited time scale. Unfortunately, time is against us. We've got another year and a half, maybe a year, 8 months to go, during which we'll be hosting nature-based enterprise summits, different types of conferences. Some of them will have to be virtual. The others will be, hopefully, we can all get back into a room together and discuss things like human beings with each other. And hopefully then we will conclude with some form of innovations that are standalone and continue past the end of our project, and then are useful for other members of the network, other projects that are just starting, and so on. So there's our website, our Twitter feed, and if there's any questions, of course, I'm totally happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
Okay.
You know, that's a really impressive investment by the European community in nature-based solutions. What do you think precipitated that massive investment?
I think I've seen Christopher Raymond's name there. There was a group of researchers. We were running FP7 projects, which is the framework program before Horizon 2020. And during these projects, which were about building resilience in cities and building climate resilience in cities, nature kept coming up. And I think what happened really was that it followed very quickly on about 2010, the IUCN, who you've heard are announcing their global standard at the moment. And we had Chantal mentioning it at the virtual hub before on one of our meetings. Seeing that it's not only, you know, ecosystem services that we're talking about, it's not only nature doing us a favor, and it's also us being able to take that favor and actually return it back to nature and make so it's a way that we can regreen our cities without having to kind of be all tree huggery about it and say, well, it's about more and more trees. But it's about it's actually very valuable to our survival in cities if we have more nature, if we can really address things like the urban heat island, flooding, and other pollution and noise, as well as social inequality. We can address other social issues by having nature. And the European Commission, being that it comes from a very social background, and a lot of the funding was going into projects that were in the social and human sciences, they started to realize, oh, this is very quite important, and we can actually get a lot of there's a lot of potential with this. And we just said, please, a group of people, and the Eclipse project was put together to develop a program for this. So possibly it was very iterative, but they very quickly saw that there was a high potential for this, and it was worth the investment. The initial investment wasn't 200, it was maybe 50 or 60 million. But very quickly, the demand was so huge and the early evidence was so emergent that they went, well, we better jump on this. So I think it came quite naturally.
Marcus, could I just briefly add to that?
Hi, Chris.
Hi. I think one of the key things here, that the nature-based solutions concept was actually policymaker driven through the European Commission, which is quite unique. Most other concepts have been developed by academics, and policymakers draw upon them. So European Commission showed a lot of leadership there. But the other thing that was happening around 2014, 2015 is that FP7 had strongly invested in urban nature and ecosystem services, mainly from a biodiversity and ecosystem service supply perspective. But the engagement with business and innovations had been missing from that program. So the European Commission needed a new concept as a way to engage with the innovation dimension of Horizon 2020. And that's how the nature-based solutions concept was seen as a way to engage with that innovations agenda. That's the way I understand it, Marcus. But
yeah, it's hard to know, Carl. I think that's probably much more accurate than I could have put it. It certainly was from a more policy point of view. But what we were really seeing here is that policymakers are actually listening and reading the results coming in from the projects that they had funded. That was very welcoming, I have to say. I found that very reassuring that they were understanding and they were seeing potential. So I thought that was that's a good take-home message. And not saying everything is rosy and good, but of all the things, that's quite a good thing to have on your side.
I suppose in part it may have something also to do with the sort of differences in the way that, so we heard from Sarah, and I think the network in the US Forest Service is doing quite a lot in the United States with respect to these questions of nature-based solutions. And so to some extent, EPA and other agencies, maybe Sarah has comment on this, but in terms of the funding of research, yeah, but in terms of the funding of research, and I'm an NSF person. I've always had all my funding from NSF, and I think that you know, it hasn't really, in the same way that Horizon 2020 has sort of infused the academic community with these sort of directives, we don't have that kind of mechanism really for the NSF funding in the United States. That there's kind of a director that's sort of more organic, I think.
Yeah, the problem with the Horizon process was that for a lot of academics, we started to see during the FP7, the previous framework 7, this is framework 8, we're going into framework 9, which is called Horizon Europe. During that process, it moved very quickly from only academics getting funded to lead projects to non-academics leading projects. So of the 4 projects that I mentioned that are in our cluster, we're the only one that's led by the academic institution. The other 3 are led by non-academic. One is led by a city, and the other 2 are led by companies, SMEs. So the interesting thing about this is that that triangle I showed you was very much part of the, developed in the previous era and embraced as that it's not just academics that can produce knowledge and can produce policy, that it can be done by pairing off different large institutions. And that could include NGOs and other, SMEs includes NGOs and so it's interesting from that point of view but it also is bemoaned a lot by the academics because there's less money for academics than there is than it was in the past. But then they're spreading the funding around different institutions that generate knowledge and capturing that knowledge. And that's quite important because we had a wealth of knowledge in cities that is hidden. It's largely internal. And so how we dig that out, all those living lab experiments, all those, all those different things that cities are trying out, and all those different things that the Forest Service are trying out. We did dig them out, and that's great. It's starting. They're all starting to emerge now. Sometimes in an academic paper, but other times in like we're doing now, webinars and other types of physical or companies like the wood project in Baltimore that was mentioned earlier on. Those taking something that came from research, that came from the knowledge that we have, and say, how can we benefit communities with this, and not just telling them about it, but actually just put our money where our mouth is and do something about it. And that's where now we're starting to see, which Chris was mentioning about, where the innovations are coming, where policymakers really want to see this going. That's really helping people on a more physical, practical level. And at the same time, we're tackling climate, we're tackling cohesion, we're tackling other issues, and giving another bit of armor to the way we deal with problems, societal problems that are in cities.
Marcus, I think we have a question from Isabel Ripa.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm talking with you from Logroño in the north of Spain, and at present I'm collaborating. Well, I'm an independent consultant, and I'm collaborating with my city that wants to become greener. Okay, so that's the plan, and we are just at the beginning. So I'm really very, very interested and very keen in getting in contact with you and identifying opportunities for collaboration. And I would like to ask you, because I know that the European Commission, by the way, I was in a meeting and I understand that the Vice President, Franz Timmermans, is very, very interested in greening all urban and peri-urban areas of Europe. So I think there is a very strong policy interest in that. But then there is a project to have urban greening plans in all cities above 20,000 inhabitants by the end of 2021. And this is going to be part of a EU urban greening platform, a green city accord. I don't know, some of you may give more information about this. Thank you.
Yes, that's very much ambitious program. And actually what I should have mentioned, of course, is that the result of this, what Chris was saying, this policymaker-led initiative, is we now have the European Green Deal, which originally was to stimulate the European green economy, but actually it's now to re-stimulate the economy using a green approach. So it's actually rather timely. And Ursula von der Leyen's, the president's speech recently had 11 or 12 references to nature-based solutions, which I don't think I've heard from any president in before. And you're dead right. There's a stated desire to regreen cities using this, and to use the Green Deal, to use this potential funding source to do this. I think I suppose it's like any project or a moonshot or whatever. It's like you have to make a very bold statement, and say we're going to do this, and we're going to make it for every city, and we're going to make it now, this week, next month, 2 years. But the devil is in the detail, as they say. The difficulty is how are we going to do that? Some cities are very well prepared for this. Some cities it's very easy to green, because like the one I live in, it rains all the time, so it gets naturally green. But there are whole areas of Europe and the world, the Mediterranean climates, and that where regreening or greening a city is very much more technical and very difficult. So it's not going to be easy throughout the whole European project and the whole European ecosystem. And I'd say globally, it's the same issue. But it is very much a stated objective. And I do like that approach, although sometimes you can be hung by the same level of commitment. So sometimes maybe having a date on it is both a blessing and a curse. But at the same time, I think it's really good that we do these things, we say these things. But we have had deadlines before. We had the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2010, and we had the Sustainable Millennium Development Goals. We have different goals set. And so giving ourselves goals, targets is really good. But our big thing is, how do we measure our successes? We need to measure our success. And how do we measure that is quite important, because then we can say we are green, we're not green. But this, more importantly, it's not just good enough to be green anymore. AstroTurf is green. We need to be biodiverse in our cities, and that's the hard part, because culturally some biodiversity is not as liked as other biodiversity, so it's always going to be very difficult. So that's where the processes that we're doing in our project, the co-creation processes, can really help tackle some of those cultural issues. It's a really good point, though.
Thank you, Marcus. So we are past our scheduled time. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and great thanks to Sarah and Marcus, our speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a scan or save the chat so that we can address these questions that are in the chat later through the discussions with it, and we'll get that information out to you all. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.